Hello everybody, welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Jose.
I'm Mike.
God. What did you think of Flatliners?
So we saw Flatliners, which is a remake of a film I haven't seen from 17 years ago.
I've seen it.
Was it good?
No. It wasn't. It was a success. It was a hit. And actually, it starred a whole bunch of people who were already, like, on the first steps of stardom. So it's Kevin Bacon and Kiefer Sutherland and also
Julia Roberts.
Yeah, Julia Roberts. Well, Julia Roberts was a star of the film, really. And there was also one of the cute brother of Alec Baldwin.
William Baldwin.
Yeah, William Baldwin, I think.
I'm only saying that because I read it. I don't think he's cute.
Well, kind of. He was thought to be at that time. So and it seemed
And Oliver Platt, who I love. Anyway. So the original was what, campy?
No, actually, it was almost like a teen movie, and kind of glamorous and fun.
Well, sounds about right.
And slick, really. It was directed by
Joel Schumacher.
Yes, so so it was that kind of movie. So actually, one of the things that surprised me of watching it today was that it had a much darker tone, and actually in a much darker look. What did you think?
I haven't seen the original.
Right.
This film I thought had some. I was really looking forward to it from the trailer.
Yes.
We'd seen it in the cinema. It looked like you say, it looked like a teen movie. It looked like it was going to be fun and silly and quite stupid. What you got from the trailer was that these kids they flatline, so they make themselves die. They're medical students, so they inject themselves with stuff, and then they provide a shock with a defibrillator to themselves, or to their friends do it to them. They die for a couple of minutes. They say, "Leave us there," and then they bring them back. And from this, their horizons are expanded. It's like they've had the most amazing drug trip.
Yes.
They have access to parts of their brains that they hitherto thought were gone. But then they also start to maybe see things, weird stuff starts to happen, and you wonder if have they crossed over into another kind of realm? What's happened? So that was the idea, and I thought that's a really cool idea. As it happened, I think the film is full of these inconsistencies. Like, it's never quite a failure, but it's never brilliant, and it's not fun enough. Essentially, like you say, it had this dark tone to it.
Yes.
It was like it was trying to treat its subject matter with a level of seriousness, which in some respects it deserves, because the film becomes about apology and regret and your past. You're not being able to escape your past.
It's very superficially done, though.
But that's the problem. Like, it's too superficial, where it needs to have some seriousness, and actually could have some seriousness.
Yes.
But it's serious where it needs to be more superficial. Where it needs to be more creepy and silly, it tries to take itself quite seriously.
I thought the beginning was rather wonderful.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the way that the characters set out. And also, I think the cast is so attractive. Right? Like,
Well, I said to you at the start, it should be called Hot Doctors.
Yes. I mean, but really, I was so happy to see Ellen Page, right?
Yeah, she's great.
Because she's marvelous, and she's got this kind of gravity and serious, and she's very accessible, and you feel that you know what she's thinking, and she's kind of very purposeful and engaged in this film. It was really wonderful to see her, right? But in a way, kind of, it was wonderful to see her, but you kind of had already seen her that way before, right? So, and then there was James Norton, who looks like, extraordinarily handsome and who's incredibly good. And then there's Diego Luna, who looks like a kind of a Jesus figure, actually. Sometimes the way that he's photographed, he's got kind of like this odd look with the long hair, and he's very thin. He looks like he's eating grass and has been practicing yoga for 10 years, right?
There's one particular cut where Ellen Page's character is having her first hallucination, and as she kind of flies, the camera point of view flies through a stained glass image of Jesus, it immediately cuts to Diego Luna.
Yeah.
So the film's foregrounding that a little bit.
Yes. And there was also Kiersey Clemons, who's that very, very pretty girl who's dominated by her mother. And she really does have like a Cupid doll feature. She's incredibly pretty and I think incredibly engaging. The only bit of the casting that failed for me was Nina Dobrev's Marlowe. The doctor who caused the death of a patient and then went into the mortuary and erased and changed the record. I just thought she just wasn't charismatic enough to compete with the rest of the cast, and I wondered why she'd been cast, actually.
Well, the film tells you why she's been cast.
Why?
Well, literally, she and Diego Luna have had sex, and then she's lying on top of him, and she says, "What do you see in me?" And he goes, "You're really hot." That's what she's in the film for. As if the others weren't hot enough.
Well, I think everyone in the film is very attractive, but they're very attractive and they're very good. Whereas I thought she drew a blank for me.
But she is on another level of hotness.
Is she?
I think she is.
Really?
Speaking as a heterosexual man.
You're the one who would know.
It's funny because you say the ginger character you said was incredibly attractive, and I didn't see it.
Ah, right. Okay, then
not my type.
Right. Okay. So yes. So we compensate for each other's blind spots.
There's something in that.
That's good. So I thought you had an amazingly attractive and engaging and very, very good cast, with Kiefer Sutherland making an appearance from the first film, and he's quite good as well.
Yeah.
Though, they could have made that role more showy, really, to merit his presence, I think.
Yeah, it should be said, because I think before the film he was telling people that he was going to be reprising his role from the first film as a kind of, now he's grown up and put it behind him, which he doesn't. He's just, it's a cameo, really.
It is.
He's playing the kind of head doctor to all of their students.
But it's almost like too extended for a cameo. It seems it's a supporting part with no merit.
Well, no, it's a perfectly reasonable role to have. It's just, what I'm establishing is that he's not, this isn't a sequel.
It's not good enough for Kiefer, really. I don't know why he took it. I think it begins kind of very interestingly and sets up the characters very well, and you see the film is very good at showing you each of the characters, each of the events that happen to them, what they hope to gain from flatlining, and then the trauma of their past that's making problems for them. And then it becomes very bad at indicating what those problems are. So is it a hallucination? Is it opening a portal to another dimension? Is it all on their heads? The film is very contradictory about that, really. So, it draws up all of these suppositions, and, then... as you said earlier, it's very inconsistent in the way that it demonstrates it. For example, at one point you see the James,
the ginger guy,
the hot doctor.
I think the other one's way hotter.
Getting stabbed in the hand, and then he appears with his hand stabbed, and he tells us that actually somebody stabbed him in the hand. That it's not his imagination. It wasn't him doing it. That actually he has been stabbed.
You've seen he was climbing out of the sea onto a dock, and his hand gets stabbed by someone else. That's what you're in his point of view that night.
Yeah, well, that's what we're shown. But actually, it could still be that he's hallucinating. And,
exactly. That's what I'm saying. But you're showing him getting stabbed by a different person's hand.
Yes.
And then he says, "Someone stabbed me," which is quite reasonable for him to say. And then Diego Luna's character says, "Well, people on drug trips hurt themselves all the time." So the film. You're absolutely right. This is something I was going to bring up too. And inconsistent is the word I think. It's like used all the way through this film, because it kind of wants to have its cake and eat it with the whole: is this the afterlife? Is it a hallucination? Have they messed with their own brains? I think the film would be a lot better if it made it very clear right at the start that it has no interest in pursuing real science, because ultimately it can't. It's saying that well, I suppose it sort of could, but it
doesn't know what it wants to be. I mean, it has a lot of horror elements, which I think aren't quite warranted by the film. I mean, it's not a horror film, and yet, many of the scenes are shot as if the film were a horror film, and become unsatisfying because each of these things has a different logic, really. And then on the other hand, I think it's quite dumb in its dramatization of a particular view of life. So, the film's whole message is that if you reconcile yourself with the past, then you can have a stress-free, worry-free present, and have the possibilities of a future. Whereas, if you've committed some terrible thing in the past, and some of the things weren't so terrible in my view, then you're basically not admitting it or not reconciling with you or not asking for forgiveness for the bad things that you've done is something that will kill you. And I think that's such a stupid and simplistic way of life. We all deal with regrets. We all deal with kind of things that actually, because they're in the past, you can't fix, and so on. And the film offers like a super stupidly simple solution to all of these kind of real problems in a way that the film throws up, which is, that even these young doctors very early on their career have already, in spite of being very good people, kind of done things they regret.
Yeah,
but who hasn't? C'est la vie. It's just so stupid to think you can solve everything. The look of the film, there were scenes where the first incident with the Ellen Page character happens, where she thinks she's seeing something and she realizes that she's seeing her sister, and the film turns really black, right? And it's very beautifully done, I thought, kind of. She turns into a shadow, just like the villain in Gilda. She turns almost like two-dimensional. And then kind of, you begin to see like the lights in her eyes, and, her eyes that had remained quite shadowy, all of a sudden kind of, the camera and the cinematography brings them out. And I thought, that whole way that the thing was lit and shot and actually the concept behind it was really intriguing.
There are some aspects to the visuals that are quite beautiful. There are also aspects that I actually picked up on being quite ugly.
Yes.
When the film shot at night a few times, it degrades into this horrible digital look. That when they're trying to escape in the car, a couple of other points, because they're moving so quickly, and I don't know exactly what the technical sort of reasons behind it are, but because the film's being shot digitally, it takes on this kind of high frame rate, really smooth look that makes it look incredibly cheap. And then it's very marked because most of the time it does look perfectly fine. It looks like it's a regular film. I thought it was mainly pretty unremarkable, the way it looked. It had a few moments where it was very beautiful and a few moments where I really picked up on that. It was
I think you're right. I mean, so in a way, this could be a compliment, or this could be a criticism, because I think
inconsistent again.
Yeah, the best things about the film, I thought, or the things that most caught my eye, were those moments with Ellen Page in the darkness. And then you look for other things in the rest of the film, like a kind of, a visual motif or kind of recurring patterns, or, whether the film is trying to do something. And actually, I couldn't quite detect that really, So, it kind of, it raises kind of some issues and expectations that then it doesn't follow through. So I'm glad I saw it, but I thought that I have now seen all of the films playing in Cineworld, all of them, and the best one is still Mother.
Well, yeah. Hard to outdo Mother, though. I want to go back to what you said about it. Did you say it's not a horror or shouldn't be a horror?
I think, yeah. Well, I think that there are horror elements in the film that probably shouldn't be there.
See, I disagree. I think actually the fact that it uses these horror elements is perfectly justified, and I think it makes quite a lot of sense. And it wasn't like it was a surprise. It's pretty much in the trailer. This is going to be
right.
They undergo this sort of dying and coming back, and then encounter scary things. So
yes.
it wasn't a surprise that it was a horror. But I think it's perfectly fair to sort of to use horror in the way that it does, because what ultimately happens is they become tortured by these regrets or mistakes that they've made, and it's sort of, I think, justified that happens in a scary way. I mean, it terrifies them, and they start to fear that they might die because of it. They don't really know what's going on. To use kind of horror techniques to put that on screen, I think it's perfectly fair. It's interesting that,
but it's perfectly fair if you do them consistently, but
I don't think they're necessarily inconsistent.
Well, I think
it's just that it's more unclear. It's because the film never quite establishes whether it wants to be. The film wants to it wants to remain ambiguous, whether it's as to whether it is showing real things that are happening, that they've actually accessed some other dimension, or whether it's their brains doing this to them.
Okay.
I think as the film continues, it becomes clearer that it's their brains doing it to them.
Well,
but it's never fully established, and that's the issue.
It's never fully established. And I suppose let's be more specific about what horror means, because, horror is now used in conjunction with so many genres that I think it might not be clear. I think basically, the premise of the film is that it's kind of, asking questions, in a manner that begins, scientifically, but really the questions that they pose are ethical ones. They are about how to lead a good life. Now, the way that the film has chosen to answer these questions is through recourse to the supernatural, really. But, you could have had, like, for example, horror, and turned this film into a sci-fi type of thing, right? Or you could have turned it into a supernatural type of thing, right? Or, there's many other versions. But actually, it doesn't quite do any of that. I think what underpins the whole film is actually a question of faith, of Christian faith, really.
Okay.
Which is why this thing about kind of, apologizing and reconciling and, doing the right thing, and the right, you have to do the right thing, because if you don't do the right thing, kind of basically you're going to confront yourself with a hellish version, of a future or of a present that will kill you. I think there is kind of like a whole, religious underpinning to this film.
But do you not think you're talking about it could do a sci-fi thing, or it could do this, that, and the other? The idea...
Or it could do a psychological horror.
But I think that's really what it is. I think the idea that... the idea of being tortured by your own mistakes internally, and that being kind of blown up to, a kind of embody a real world horror, which is what happens to these guys. Essentially, they're just hallucinating like crazy. But it's all based on their own regrets.
But it's... Well, you realize that that's the key to the film at the end. But actually, the way that it's shown to you, the first one was quite supernatural, right? Like, that image of Jesus and the stained glass and so on, right? The last one, for example, was very zombie-esque. Right? Like,
well, that first one isn't. That first one is just her flying around. There's nothing scary in that initial trip of hers when she's actually flatlining. That's when the Jesus thing happens. But I'm talking about when it becomes scary and they actually start to confront their pasts in later hallucinations. I don't think it's not like. I think essentially that is something about the film that is actually consistent. Like it because once you enter that realm, it kind of doesn't matter how much of it is sort of surreal or not. You're in that kind of...
I suppose it wouldn't matter that way, if it were kind of consistently deployed in that way, but maybe this is where we disagree, because I don't think it is deployed consistently, and I think the film doesn't answer those questions satisfactorily. So we both now agree, I suppose, that the most likely thing is that it happens in their head, but kind of the film raises all of these questions that it doesn't kind of really answer, because there's no... The last image in the film is the image of Ellen Page's ghost, as if coming from heaven, reassuring, the one of the other...
The hot girl.
Yeah, whatever her name is. The one you say is the hot girl. And, telling her, forgive yourself. I mean, really, it's ridiculous.
I had a problem with that, but that was not in terms of the consistency of the kind of apparitions and hallucinations. I think it's fair to say that it becomes clear that this is just happening in their heads, because it becomes very clear that it's about their own attitudes to themselves, as opposed to kind of appeasing some god or something. But on the other hand, the only mention of the afterlife is right at the start, when Ellen Page is setting up the experiment at first, and she says, "What if we could do science on the afterlife?" Something like that. So you kind of get this thing of, are they actually going to the afterlife? But they're sort of not, right?
Except that then there's her ghost at the end.
But it's not a ghost at the end. It's a vision. She's having
vision.
She's having her crazy hallucinations. It doesn't show up for real, the ghost.
Well, it happens at the end of her flatline, right? So it's happening during her flatline.
Right.
So actually, it's unclear. I don't
think that's unclear.
Well, for me, it is.
Well, because at the same time, she doesn't see that in the real world. She sees it in...
We are shown her experience of the flatline.
Yeah.
right, in which she's dead, basically, and she's being brought back to life, and she doesn't want to come back to life because she has so much guilt and remorse. And then this image of Ellen Page, appears, all bathed in white light,
Right.
and telling her to forgive herself.
But that happens within her...
It happens within her flatline.
Within her flatline.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily within her head. Like, we don't know that, right? Like,
But why is there a suggestion that isn't in her head, whereas everything else is? How are you making the
no.
distinction?
You're
between that?
saying that everything else is. I mean, I think
No. You're saying that vision of Ellen Page is somehow coming from somewhere else and being inserted into her flatline. I'm saying it's all in her head.
I'm saying that the image of her of Ellen Page dressed in light is bringing up images of an angel coming from heaven, which is
Right.
happening during her flatline, which is very different than the other things. Where, let's say, for example, the place where Ellen Page gets killed, where something actually comes and drags her and pushes her off the fire escape.
Yeah.
Right? Now, you could say that that's in her head, but actually you're also shown kind of some force pushing her and her not wanting to go.
Sure.
Right. So they're
That,
very
I think,
different
is a
kinds
much
of
more
things.
concrete thing to argue. I don't think it's at all fair to argue that the image of Ellen Page as this vision of light means that it's somehow different to the flatline. That's part of the flatline, it seems to me, perfectly clear.
Oh, well, we can see that, but the question is the status of the flatline. Is the flatline only kind of the filmmakers showing us their conscious experience of what's happening to them?
It seems fair to me to say that it is. I don't see any suggestion that it's not. The flatlines, it seems very clear to me, are point of view, essentially. So when Ellen Page gets dragged in a way that she couldn't be kind of pushing herself across the floor like that, it seems to be very clear that she's imagining that, and what's happening in real life is not the same.
Well,
She's
the film,
moving
I think the
herself.
film shows that very confusingly, because actually it's showing a different.
This
What
is
it's
where the
showing
film is
you
inconsistent as to
is
whether
her being dragged.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I agree. Like at the time, when the film has done far less work on sort of developing what the nature of these hallucinations is, at that time, it's completely fair to wonder. So, is there actually something dragging her, or is this something she's imagining about herself? But I think as the film moves on and towards the end, there's been so little development of the idea that it could be legitimately supernatural that it's fair to forget it and say this isn't what it's about. The film is talking about what these people are interpreting about themselves, making happen in their own heads.
Yeah, but then
Because the film
then
ends
you're
up-
left very unsatisfied because you can't see how it happens. You can't see how the Ellen Page character fleeing, ends up being pushed to the stairs, and then that somehow she did it to herself.
I kind of agree.
Or the James Norton stabbing, thinking that he's being stabbed, but actually having stabbed himself. So actually, the film should show you those differences, really.
I kind of agree.
Or at some point, it should show you those differences.
I kind of agree, but I didn't find it a problem at all. Like I don't think it's necessarily I don't think it's necessary really that it should have to do that. I think it's fair to kind of leave that up to interpretation. Like when if the film were to go back and show this is how this happened, it would be quite disappointing. If it showed you at the time, there might be a way of doing it so that it was intercut. Like the real thing happening, him stabbing himself with his hallucination of the girl stabbing him. That there might be a way of doing that, or again, showing Ellen Page being dragged in her brain, in her vision, as opposed to throwing herself down the hallway in real life. There might be a way of doing that, but I think the fact that it doesn't want to do that and it only wants to engage with the hallucinatory world isn't unfair. I'm not trying to defend this as a perfect movie. I do think it still has inconsistencies and it doesn't want to explain itself enough.
Yeah.
But I didn't have huge problems with these.
Yes, I did, because if you remember the beginning, like after the first two flatlines, one of the characters, how interesting. The Ellen Page character is living completely in the past, and she's baking bread and doing things, right? Mm. And the James Norton, is it, the hot doctor character,
the ginger doctor,
is living completely in the present, right? So they're trying to make sense about the issue of flatlining.
What do people have in common with their flatlines?
That's
How
right,
does it affect people?
And then actually kind of, that then doesn't get reapplied into the,
Yes.
that logic doesn't get reapplied into the other characters. So it kind of, you're just kind of wondering what's up, really.
I agree. That's something that the film does an awful lot of coming up with things and immediately just leaving them where they are. And it would do well to develop these things more, or not come up with them, because it leads to these inconsistencies where it's all of a sudden it has the kernels of like 7 or 8 ideas on the go without developing anything, because it's doesn't have the confidence or not interested in them. But why bring them up in the first place? And it's very unsatisfying the way it deals with. It comes up with ideas and drops them, whereas it could be thematically dealing with a lot more than it is. Yeah. I do have a problem with the issue of apologies, and I think you kind of hinted at it, or maybe even mentioned it completely. The idea, the problem that I have, which is the idea that the idea that an apology is all about yourself in quite a selfish sort of way. So there's this line in Community, right? This is what occurred to me while I was watching the film. There's an episode of Community where Jeff, the main character, has offended this girl called Kim a long time ago, and he doesn't know why. Jeff says, "I can never apologise, I can never change her mind, that makes me a dick forever," because he thinks that she's dead. This Kim's dead. So he thinks, "I can never apologise." And he says, "Do you think that's what an apology is? A spell you cast on another person to make them forgive you? Apologies are opportunities to admit your own mistakes." That's really brilliant. That's what I was thinking about in Flatliners. They seem to think of apologies in this way, that it's like, once I've apologised, once I've said these magic words, then everything's good.
Yeah.
So the Ginger Doctor character, he does it to the girl that he impregnated and left. He just says, basically, "I'm sorry."
It's a very Catholic view of life.
I want to do it right. And the black girl, what's her name?
Sophia.
She, when she was at school, she leaked these nudes of someone she was jealous of.
Yes.
To the school and ruined the girl's life. And then she goes to the girl. In fact, it's never more spelled out than it is with her. She goes to the girl, tracks her down, and says, "I want to apologise. I need you to forgive me." It's like, I need you to forgive me. It's like, I've done my part. I've apologised. Now I need you to make sure that do your part and forgive me. It's like, maybe I can't,
Yeah.
Maybe it's not up to me to forgive you.
Maybe I'd say, fuck off,
Yeah. There's
you've made 10 years of misery and you expect that this is going to be, enough?
Yeah. It's so perfunctory the way she apologises. It really fucked me off, actually.
I thought, so let me just pursue this thought. And it is just a thought, but I thought it was very Catholic, very Roman Catholic in that way, right? Because the whole thing of the confessional, and you sin, and sin is a part of life and whatever, then you go and ask forgiveness, right? And it makes everything okay. But you have to do penance at least, right? Which is, say 1,000 Hail Marys or whatever.
Yeah.
Here, it's like, you don't even get the 1,000 Hail Marys. It's, I need you to forgive me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like, charge it.
I really hate that, because I thought the film it then seemed was going to kind of pursue this moral of saying, basically, as long as you've said you're sorry for whatever you've done, even if it's as bad as completely ruining someone's life in school by sending their nude pics around, you have no right to do. Even if you've done that, just say sorry, and you've done your part.
Yes.
I found that, and then the film goes on to say, it's about forgiving yourself. It's like, well, I forgive myself for spreading the nude pics around.
Yes. And I'll do it again tomorrow, because I'm such a forgiving person.
The film could pursue a really interesting line of apology and forgiveness, and what does it mean to apologise? Because the idea that these people are being internally screwed up by their own refusal to accept their mistakes, even realise their mistakes and try to make amends.
Yes.
That's a really good idea, I think, and that's perfectly legitimate to kind of do in a horror format, to turn these to turn these past mistakes into things that become terrifying torture. But then the film ends up concluding this with a kind of, you've done your part, now everything's fine.
I thought the choice of the 4 mistakes was very misguided, bordering on stupid. Because, for example, Ellen Page's mistake was what? That she was distracted during driving?
She was texting while driving.
Okay.
But the problem, the interesting thing about her mistake is that she can't do anything to reconcile it. That her sister died in that car accident, and that's it. So,
but
does she have no option but to die?
Okay, I knew that the phone rang and she took the call, but I didn't realize it was texting.
Or texting or phone. But the point is, she shouldn't have been on the phone.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Okay, drivers of Britain, listen. So, and then so I thought that the things that they did, it could have been so much more interesting if they'd been really kind of quite different, whereas, kind of, so the Sophia character, who I thought was rather wonderfully played by, is it Kiersey Clemons?
Yeah, Kiersey Clemons.
Kiersey Clemons. I thought she was wonderful.
Yes.
And very pretty and so on. But what she does is really terrible. And actually what makes it terrible is the reason she does it for, which seems to me kind of, it signifies what is wrong with American culture, really. So, you do something so heinous, really, just because she's got a GPA that's better than yours. Yeah. So actually, it's to get a higher GPA, to eliminate her competition.
Well, it wasn't even for that, really. It wasn't going to make her GPA any worse. It was just to ruin her life. Yeah, she was jealous.
So, that seems to me like so much more vile than an accident, really.
Yeah.
And for such a petty reason. And actually, I don't think that the screenplay works that out, because the way that she's shown is she's this nice girl who's under her mother's thumb. But actually, that kind of thinking,
that behavior
is inconsistent with the character that's depicted for us, really.
Yeah.
So, whereas like James Norton's thing, I could easily imagine that's probably something that's happened to lots of guys, really. And it's not a nice thing. But, again, it's kind of, they're not all comparable, really.
No. I didn't listen to his whole thing. Obviously, I knew he impregnated the girl, but he was surprised by the fact that she actually had the kid.
That's right. So his thing was that he'd gotten a girl pregnant, he'd paid for her abortion, and, then had promised to be with her while it happened.
Right.
And then kind of couldn't face it and drove past rather than going in, right? Which, I know it's not a good thing, so don't get me wrong, but...
It's pretty bad.
Well, it's pretty bad, but there are men who wouldn't even have paid for the abortion, who would just have, not cared. I mean,
That's still pretty bad, though.
I know.
I'm putting that at least on the level of spreading the nude pics around. That's quite a hard thing to do to someone.
Well, you see, I wouldn't put it on that level. I think it's cowardice, but it's not like evil-mindedness. I'm going to ruin your life, right? It's a cowardly moment, really. So, whereas actually, the thing about spreading the nude pictures and the thing about going and eliminating the autopsy record and fixing the autopsy record, to me, are really kind of like, of a different order. So I think, which I don't have a problem with. I think if you're going, it would have been very interesting, to actually use those examples of past sins in a much more imaginative way than the film does presently.
Yeah, and to try and say that there is some difference. Like, some of these things are not as bad as the others.
Yes.
But yeah, they just all get affected equally. And you're left there thinking, Ellen Page, especially, doesn't deserve the treatment that Sophia does. They've done things of such different severity.
Exactly.
Well, we say that. I mean, she did kill her sister.
No,
but it was
a moment of negligence resulted in her sister's death. It wasn't a deliberate, like, I'm going to kill my sister.
No, yeah, exactly.
Which is where the other one was a deliberate, I'm going to ruin this girl's life. So...
again, the point is, it's a missed opportunity to do something interesting. But the whole film is really... There's nothing about the film that's fully satisfying.
Yes. Except for me, seeing the actors. I really love seeing Ellen Page and James Norton and Diego Luna. And I'm sorry for not knowing her name better. Kiersey Clemons, yeah? Anyway, she was lovely.
She was.
So...
I think, ultimately, I think my impression of the film is I was disappointed because the trailer promised an awful lot more, and then I was disappointed because it had like 10 different ways it could have been really interesting and pursued none of them and was muddled. But it's actually extra disappointing. It's extra disappointing because it shows so much promise. It has all these parts where you go, that could be good, and it's not.
Yeah. So tough luck, baby.
Yeah. It'll make money though. Its budget was $19 million, and so far in the US, it's made $2.1 million. Huh. That's not nearly as much as I thought.
No.
Wait.
It'll make its money back though. I would think out of curiosity alone.
Google has it as $61 million, so there's some discrepancy somewhere.
Yes.
It'll make money. It's got a,
Anyway, I'm kind of glad we saw it. It's not good, but I'm glad we saw it.
It's not good, but it's not bad. It's in the middle.
You're such a generous man.
Maybe I am meeting it more than halfway, but there were things about it that I did like. It was just it giveth with one hand and it taketh away with the other.
Okay, that's a good
Which
note
again
to end.
sounds pretty Catholic. I don't know if it is.
Okay, let's stop it here. I'm going to make some coffee.
Ooh, lovely.